I think boomers are the greatest generation in American history. They've never done anything wrong. In fact, how dare would I ever say anything critical of baby boomers? The harshest, most cruel emails I've ever received is if I dare say that boomers did anything except it with perfect masterstroke. So I would never, ever say that. But delayed gratification is what built the West. And what is clear is that our political leaders have decided to act in a pattern of behavior to say that children do not matter, but my convenience, my own Dow portfolio matters more than the fiscal well-being of future generations that will deteriorate and obliterate the dollar. And again, I want to reinforce this. I'm not blaming many of you because I could just see the emails right now. Many of you have done the right thing, but our political leaders have not. The idea pathogen that has infected the American political elite is that the future of America matters far less than my luxury, my comfort, and my life as a 70 or 80-year-old. And that's an inversion of what actually built America. It used to be that I'm going to sacrifice so my kids could flourish. I want to tell you guys about ReliefFactor.com, 100% drug-free Relief Factor, knee pain, back pain, joint pain, elbow pain. Learn how tens of thousands of Americans are getting out of pain 100% drug-free. Try the 3 Quick Start and feel the difference. They have Relief Factor products that will really make you happy and potentially allow you to relax and to be able to really shake off some of the stress. Relief Factor Calm is amazing. You can relax during intense and busy seasons without drowsiness, helps your body prevent damage from high cortisol levels, manage stress while traveling, stay calm in life's hectic pace, be focused and alert. Relief Factor Calm is amazing.
Hello, welcome to Give Them an Argument with Ben Burgess. I am super producer, Jacobin. And this is graphic designer, illustrator extraordinaire, J. Andrew World. How you doing, J. Andy?
Hey, I'm doing great. I am so glad that we don't have advertisements on our show like that. But that being said, I just want to say this episode's been brought to you by the Daily Wire. If you need a Wire daily, they got all your Wire needs.
If you're looking to make about $5 million a year under what could maybe be constituted as a slave contract, that's the place to go. Yeah,
are fantastic.
Yeah. So as you may have noticed, Ben Burgess is not here, but don't worry, you will see him in very, very soon. He recorded an interview very kindly with the wonderful Lillian Cicerchia about why socialists need to talk about justice. Luckily, you don't have to hear me and Andy pontificating on that subject. Do not fear. But yes, we are going to hear from Ben and Lillian. This is a really great interview in a few minutes. Right before that, though, we're going to talk about the reason that Ben is not here, which is that he is on a plane from New York City, where the three of us just were. So, Andy, you brought a clip to my attention about how certain Fox News reporters feel about New York City. So maybe you could confirm or deny after we watch whether it's accurate or not.
Yeah.
We're allowing these people out onto the streets, and we wonder why there's an exodus going out of New York and out of San Francisco and Los Angeles. It is primarily due to crime. It's due to the drug use that we see in the open air. I took a walk up to Central Park yesterday, had some time to kill. I could not escape the smell of weed everywhere. And it's just, New York is not what it used to be. I know that personally. You go through Penn Station when you take a train into this city, and you're walking over bodies that you don't know are alive or dead. The homeless are everywhere. And this mayor can talk a big game. Start to do something about it, sir, because you're going to lose all that tax revenue as people move more and more to places like Florida, to Kentucky, to Idaho.
I should. It's immature of me, but his angry breathing, I can't resist extending it like another 10 seconds. But Andy, you were just in New York City, where I live. It's my home. So what do you think about that assessment?
You know, last time I was really in New York City, I remember the garbage smell. I remember the smell of piss. It was a very welcoming bouquet that New York had. And I mean, I can understand some people really miss the smell of urine. I get that. That's probably why they want to go to red states where you got manure. That's wonderful. So I'm happy for those people. But quite frankly, marijuana is a big step up than the smell of urine and rotting garbage.
Yeah, I can say he doesn't. I know he's not a true New Yorker because if you actually live here, the change is definitely a positive one from what you would normally be smelling. And people are having fun. So he's also on the post game. We watched a clip. It's the same guy, right? Who was upset about the pregnant Joker. I think it's the same guy who was saying,
I think so.
yeah,
I
it's
don't.
with
Yeah.
these like Ken doll, Fox News guys. It's hard to tell the difference. But he was very
Yeah.
upset about pregnant Joker. He said he used to be the Joker, now he's the Woker. I hope he becomes a recurring character on the show. But yes, so for those of you who don't know, I hope you all do know because we talked about it a lot. But we were just yesterday had the Give Them a Revolution live show. Andy was there. Real quick, Andy, what would you say were some highlights from
Oh
the
man.
event?
Okay. From the jump, I show up there about an hour and a half early, and there was a band on stage and a guy outside smoking, and I asked the guy what's going on in there, like hey, I'm a part of the next event. Do you know this over? It's like, oh, we're just having a wake. Come on in. Like, join us for the wake.
Yeah, we were literally having our meet and greet, which was really great to meet. I mean, not that for the 3 people that were there to meet me, I thank you. But people were there to meet Ben and Sam and Left Reckoning folks, all those people. And there's literally a guy on stage crying, I think tears coming down his eyes, playing the guitar, eulogizing his friend.
Surfer Girl.
Yes. It was like
it was like the saddest version of Surfer Girl you've ever heard.
It was a bit Lynchian. It was a bit Lynchian, I would say. And some people were like, "Keep it down," But we're trying to do a podcast meet and greet up here, so that counter programming is pretty funny. But eventually, that was the stage where we all set up, and I think everyone who was there had a really good time. So I'm looking forward to the next one for sure. Everyone got to hang out, drink afterward. I heard some people even went to a second location, a second bar that I conked out, went to a diner.
It was a real Irish bar, like complete with Republican, Irish Republicans, the only good kind of Republicans, all over the walls, and like a real cool bartender. So it was a great place to go to.
Yeah, so everyone had a good time. Definitely recommend you check out the next live show. We don't have a date or anything yet, but this was my first one. I missed the one in LA, so it was definitely a blast. I promise I won't give him a hard time anymore, but I think one of my favorite moments was Ben had me give a pitch to all, do some labor organizing, however you can, get involved with unions. And Deep State Cuba, who was on stage with me, he really was moved by my words, and he said, that's why unions are so important. That's why everybody out there should listen to my friend Matt Leck. And I thought it was a joke, but he actually confused me for Matt Leck, making the joke that we look the exact same come on true. And Matt he enjoyed that. He was like, yeah, everyone should listen to Matt. He's a sweetheart, apologized profusely. I thought he was joking. So I appreciate it. But yeah, it was super fun. Andy, anything?
I was in the corner drawing the entire time.
Yes, yeah. Andy made some courtroom sketches, which I think we might see next episode. Some of the highlights.
Yeah, I'll actually be able to have them prepared in time. I literally, after going to the bar, went back to my hotel room, packed up, woke up my child, and hopped on a bus that left at 4:45 in the morning to come home. And now I'm here.
Yeah, Andy's doing very well considering. Actually, before we went on in the digital green room, I feel like you could barely get a sentence out, Andy. I feel like you're putting it all, you're laying it all on the line right now. You sound very cogent.
It's live, this show might be giving them an argument, but I'm all about giving them a show. So, here I am, giving them my all, and probably as soon as this thing's over, boom, I couldn't even string 3 words together after that.
So we're about to go to the interview to Silver's question. I think there was some recording. Is that right, Andy? Do you know anything about that? Is there a recording of the show yesterday? Some type of video?
Yes, the show was recorded. I believe it's going to be released for patrons at some point. But I don't have any details on that. So, but the show was recorded.
Yes, which is great if you can't make it, which we understand that everyone can make it, although nothing can capture the electricity of being in the room with your favorite podcasters. A lot of these people I never met in person, including Jay Andy, we never met in person. I was, starstruck next to Sam Cedar. I saw a lot of Starstruck fans go up to Sam and say a lot of interesting things, which is but I got to interact with some fans too. It was great. I think with that, we're gonna go to the interview as soon as I share my screen. So, Andy, hit him with the final notes before we go to the Lillian interview.
Oh wait, what notes are these?
I
lost my notes.
This is what an improv. That's what you call pimping someone out, where you just say, just riff.
I have nothing prepared, so this is my riff.
Yeah. I'm used to Ben filling up some time while I pull up the screen record. But anyway, we will be back, or at least I will be back very briefly after this, after the interview, to wish you adieu and talk a little bit about what we're going to do next show. But other than that, enjoy the interview.
All right, I am now joined by Lillian Cicerchia. Lillian, do you want to remind people who you are and what you do?
Hi, yes, I am a philosopher and I have a podcast, What's Left of Philosophy, with my philosopher pals. You should check it out. And I sometimes write for Jacobin, and I have an academic life also, which is less interesting.
It's a little bit interesting.
It's a little bit interesting. It depends. But
before we started recording, you told me that you were moving to Amsterdam for a new job, so that's actually kind of cool.
Oh, okay, yeah, that is the cool part of my academic life. I currently live in Berlin at the Free University. I've been here for a few years, and I in good time, got a permanent job, like a tenure track position at the University of Amsterdam. So I'll be teaching political theory up there, hopefully for the foreseeable future. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm originally from Illinois, so moving, now I'm living in Europe, I guess permanently. I am an expat.
Yeah, fair enough. So the only way to watch, Bulls games where you are is to stream them on your computer, or?
Oh God, it's actually really so. I have like an NBA league pass, but I always know the result of the game before I watch it. I have to watch because they start at like 1:30 or 2:30 a.m. here. So let's put it this way: I watch more games where we win than when we lose.
Fair enough.
So sometimes I like tough it out. Like if we're playing a good team and we lose and it was close, I want to see like what really went on. But if we lose by like 15 points, I'm probably not going to stick it out. So there are some downsides. And like when I go home to visit, I get really into watching live games like that. Like that's what's fun about sports. So
yeah, fair enough. I definitely feel your pain on that as somebody who, I grew up in Michigan, watch hockey. I lived for 3 years in South Korea, and I remember getting up a lot to watch games that were starting at like 8 a.m. Korean time. This is before. And this is even before there was the, whatever NHL.com stuff that you could just watch on there. But
I've been known to thrown away a week, like a day. Like if there's like a Saturday night game, I've been known to like throw my Sunday in the trash to like stay up all night to watch it and then go to bed. So
fair enough. Well, so you mentioned teaching political theory, and speaking of political theory, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because you had this article that came out at the end of 2022 in Jacobin called "Why Socialists Need to Talk About Justice," that hits on a lot of my favorite themes in terms of political philosophy, in terms of socialists actually need to say something about what socialism would be like, and so I was really always happy to see a Jacobin, but I was really particularly happy to see this. So do you want to talk just a little bit about what like what you were trying to do with this article?
Yeah, so I actually was asked to write an article about this by one of the Jacobin editors, and it took the shape that it did because I'm actually interested in something that's related but sideways of this topic about justice. So I'm interested in what socialism would be like. I've gotten really attached to just thinking about just the idea that we're not supposed, like, there's a kind of, let me back up. I'm sorry. There is a tradition in Marxist philosophy, specifically in critical theory, the Frankfurt School, and I think it's pretty like generalizable even among like non-Marxist critical theory, that we're not supposed to think about justice or what socialism would be like as like a system of norms or laws or structures or whatever, because that's like prefiguring the future and it's bound to be ideological. And the idea is that social movements themselves, you know, when workers get involved in a class movement, they develop the tools to articulate what they want socialism to look like for themselves. And because the goal of socialism is at least in part some kind of self-determination, I don't think it's reducible to self-determination, but that's important, like democracy, a self-governing society. This is, it's so, the idea is that we don't currently have that, not in a genuine form. And for a society to actually be democratic, people need to decide for themselves what they want that society to look like. So it has to come by way of democracy. So democracy has to come from democracy. And if theorists or philosophers just tell you what justice is, that's, you know, that's an authoritarian move. Like, you're going to miss things. People, not everyone is going to have a say. And so there's this prohibition on having the cook shops of the future, like having blueprints. And I think if you're around like the socialist left or like the far left and for any length of time, you will start to hear this kind of language. Like, we don't want to make blueprints. We don't know. We just want to build a revolutionary movement in whatever way you think that is, whatever way you think is good, you know?
Yeah, and I want to linger just for a minute on kind of where that idea comes from, because this is something that comes up in a few different ways. Like, there's this I don't know, this quote from Marx, I think from the 1840s, that some people really like, about how it's communism isn't a state of affairs, it's the real movement, you know, to end the way things are, something like that. I'm getting the wording slightly wrong, but you know, it's like along those lines. And there is a way that this is maybe tied into like the Marxist critique of, you know, utopian socialism, and it's also, you know, I mean, you also kind of touched on this, but I mean, this idea that it's sort of that it's maybe like, you know, undemocratic or just sort of presumptuous, right? To sort of try to figure out what the future is going to look like, because, you know, people are going to run into new problems, and, you know, and the sort of solutions to those problems are going to emerge from the, you know, the energies of, and like the kind of input, you know, of masses of people, and, you know, and there's something, you know, there's something kind of silly about, you know, socialist intellectuals sitting around and, you know, well, 1860, whatever, in some versions of this train of thought, or, you know, 2023, and sort of presuming to say, oh, here's exactly what that would look like. And so I completely agree with you that, I mean, like, ultimately this is just like a really unhelpful, prohibition. We actually should think about this. But I do wonder if you wanted to, you know, just kind of weigh in just a little bit more about like where that resistance comes from, and whether there's like something to it.
Well, I think there is something to it. Like, I think the world that it comes from has to do with what Marx and the Marxist movement, the Marxist left, the socialist Marxist left, because there are other kinds of socialists, as you were saying. There was, you know, a socialist tradition, and there is still one that's non-Marxist in nature. And the reaction that Marx had to many of these ideas was that they were a form of middle-class intellectual vanguardism. Like, there were people like Robert Owen who were like, you know, in the UK, or Charles Fourier in France, and they were just trying to build model societies. And they weren't the movement of the mass of people. They were like experiments in living that were like adjacent to, I guess, you know, capitalist social relations or emerging capitalist social relations. And it's the kind of thing that, like, I think the basic idea is that both it's not clear how to transform the whole from the perspective of like the margins in these experiments. But more importantly, for Marx, it felt like, this isn't something where you get the mass of people like involved. This is something where you kind of set it up and then you make it run in whatever way, whatever model you prefer. And the idea is that this is in some way undemocratic, because if we're talking about the general movement of history and how to transform like a whole social structure, the people need to be if the agents that do the transforming need to be involved in the decisions about what they are transforming it into. And so just having these little experiments, it's not like, they're not all like bad in themselves, but as like a general project for like how you imagine change, it can impose something rigid or unhelpful or not serving people's needs or something people don't feel connected to. So I think it's a kind of intellectual vanguardism. And then secondarily, it had a middle class base. So the opposition to thinking about justice from a socialist perspective has to do with the sense of fidelity that one wants to have to a working class movement and the capacities of ordinary people to change their lives and to determine for themselves what they want. So it's supposed to be this like real bottom up, socialism from below, bottom up democratic ethos. And I think there is something to that. Like people do need to figure out what they want society to look like. There does have to be buy-in. They can't feel like there is an elite imposing this on them and telling them what's better. So I think there's something reasonable about the objection. I just think that like we're in a kind of different political world. Like that was a world in which people saw socialism as an alternative in some way in the first place. Like you were arguing against middle-class socialists who had blueprints for socialism. That's different than arguing in a post, Soviet world in a context of capitalist realism when no one really thinks socialism is possible. So to me, those like changing conditions mean that the question might like the question might change about like what we should be thinking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think that I think that one one reason maybe one thing that might ground this opposition to like thinking about the details of what a future society might look like is the idea that the sort of successful movement will sort of figure it out when the time comes, and it's and even that there's all this like classical Marxism, there are all these was it the obstetric metaphor, the old society is already pregnant with the new one, you just kind of have to ease the birth pangs, and I do tend to think personally that the hard lesson of the 20th century is that it genuinely is more complicated than that there isn't just one thing that could happen after capitalism. There are multiple pathways and possibilities that you could go down. Some of them are a lot more desirable than others, and if that's the case, then you have to think about which one you'd want to come about, which is ultimately a question about values. And I also think just logistically, I mean, you talked about capitalist realism earlier, that, when like Mark Fisher's talking about capitalist realism, this idea that, okay, existing economic structures might not be good or desirable, but they're just seen as inevitable, as like etched into the fabric of nature, that there might be some value in sketching out alternatives, not necessarily because we think that anybody in future decades almost
do what I say.
Yeah, that they're gonna say, oh man, let's find out, let's find out exactly, let's go back into the Jacobin archives and find out what Lillian said, make sure we do exactly that, right? It's not, you don't have to think that to think that there's some value in showing in just showing that there is a possible alternative in order to sort of break down that sense that it's just not realistic to think that there's a different way things could be.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what you said about the different pathways is important. Like, so on the one hand, there's the example of like fascism is one pathway in the mid 20th century, and then state socialism is another pathway. And today we're having all these debates on the left that I think are interesting to think about like neo-feudalism or like techno-feudalism. It's not a thesis I'm partial to, but like, what if the end of capitalism is actually a return to something much worse? So like, there's the teleological assumptions that there is a kind of development to history and that history has a direction is one set of problems. And then even if you don't agree with the teleological view, like the almost messianic view of like the kind of faith in the revolutionary movement is another problem. And those two things often go together, but are also, I think, sometimes in some authors separable. But the messianic view is like, yeah, we're gonna have the movement, and the movement's gonna decide, and that like we have faith that we're gonna be so democratic and so disciplined that in the moment of revolution, like we believe that we are going to figure it out, and that like we're going to deliver humanity into a more just, into a free future. And I think both of these are like, these are not things that are common sense to us anymore. And from what I can tell, people's continuing resistance to the blueprints of the future thing, it has more to do with their kind of adherence to this idea of like socialism from below, where like they're like, it's, even if they don't have a messianic idea of like socialism, there's still this idea, the intuition, the gut intuition is that whatever the revolutionary movement does to have kind of internal democracy will be a kind of prefigured version of whatever the whole society turns into at the moment of revolution. And so transition is basic, like the revolutionary movement itself is like pregnant with the future, as you were saying. And so there's this idea that the transition it will emerge. There's still like this faith there. And I think my point was like, I just think that it's easier to have faith in such a thing if people, both in and out of the revolutionary movement, have a broad sense of what they are doing and going for. Like, and if people outside of that movement itself, so say you're not a worker, if the working class can achieve a kind of hegemonic vision of what the future should look like, what a just society should look like, that is actually facilitating that very democratic deliberation and discussion that people want to, I think rightly want to hold onto, but there have to be some like grounds for thinking that this is going somewhere. People have to be able to see the future. And sadly, for us to be able to imagine the future, it usually involves positing what makes it legitimate, what makes it good, what makes it just. And sadly, these are the, sadly for many Marxists, like these are the things that political philosophy, which some people think is just bourgeois, like that's what they do. They talk about right and wrong, just and unjust, good and bad, and they evaluate things. And they say what they think justice would be like. And so I think socialists should like do something similar and say why why not socialism, I guess.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I actually saw, there's like a certain kind of person who seems to sit on Twitter waiting for Jacobin to post articles so they can react to the headlines to them and explain, how they do.
I love it. Every time Jacobin posts them. And it's always like the art. So first of all, there's like a bunch of other articles on the website like are about a similar topic that like contradict the thesis, because actually there are a plurality of views.
Sure.
There's like a version of a person who like waits for an article they don't like and then like retweets it to like make sure we all know how bourgeois and reformist Jacobin really is.
Yeah, exactly. And one of those people I saw when one of the times they posted this article said, well, isn't the very idea of justice or talking about justice a liberal thing, which I have to say, I thought was kind of funny. Like, is Plato a liberal, right? But like also, I think it does raise maybe a more interesting question, which is about liberalism, not in the sense of what we might mean if like if we use the word liberal is in a derogatory way, which I'm certainly prone to do. That in like a contemporary political sense, meaning like liberalism, like Democratic Party liberalism or something like that, but liberalism in sort of the broadest and most interesting sense of that term, that like philosophical liberalism, liberal ideas of justice. Because I know, even separately from this article, I know this is something you've thought about. I know, I saw that you've given a talk that was about this to some extent, and in starting to think about the kind of values that would inform what we think a post-capitalist society should look like. I mean, I think this is an important question. So, how would you think about the sort of relationship between liberalism in the broadest sense, or maybe like certain elements of liberalism that might be redeemable, and that kind of what we're going for in any kind of worthwhile socialist project?
So I want to answer kind of respond to the first thing you said about whether or not talking about justice as such is already liberal, or like defining the task of political philosophy to talk about justice as such. First of all, I never said that. I don't think that the task of political philosophy is only to talk about justice. It's one of many tasks. Like, you can do, just FYI for later, you can do political philosophy about whatever you want. Like, philosophy is a highly capacious way of thinking. Like, you can do a philosophy, like, there's Rodrigo Nunes just wrote a book about a philosophy of political organization. You can do whatever you want. And so it is not the only thing to think about and to take seriously. It is one question among many. It's a very important question. It's like the origin of political philosophy as we know it is the classic question, what is justice? But there are many other questions. So is it intrinsically liberal to talk about justice? No. To me, that's like silly. Like, again, like, was Plato a liberal? No, he was actually quite keen to avoid democracy as like an outcome. So there's that. The second thing is about like my opinions about liberalism broadly. So I don't identify as a liberal. I just think socialists need to take liberalism seriously, because liberalism is what creates people's sense of legitimacy in the status quo. And on its own terms, I think liberal can have a strong status quo bias and can be conservative relative to the things we want in the future, even if it's not conservative to the things that were going on in past eras. Thinking about liberalism on its own terms is often like it often has a conservativizing effect on what we think is possible and, again, legitimate. So which is, that's why, and I always use this example, like, that's why conversations about protest and civil disobedience are so mind-boggling for like official liberalism. It's because you're breaking the law. What legitimates the social order? Well, the law. The law is the codification of a set of norms. They may be the result of past conflicts and so on, but they are our best, for many people, they are our best shot at like having some kind of public consensus about what justice is. And many people think they are basically interchangeable, the law and justice. So breaking the law becomes like a super difficult thing to justify with liberal means, because the things that are justifiable already preclude like their own, you can't undermine the things people already think are justifiable. So there's problems with just being a liberal socialist, like in the sense that I just want to make liberal norms fit socialism. As in, like, as Marx would say, the real movement of history, there are some, like, it doesn't, like, those ideas don't always have the kind of forward-looking or don't always develop the right tensions with the contradictions of the status quo that they need to have to give us, the tools we need to make our arguments and so on. So I think liberalism as such has some problems. But they're not. But I think I also have more of like a Hegelian view of these norms, which is that just because they have a conservativizing tendency in the present, they are related in a contradictory way to that present. And often what we want to do is see how they change within a movement toward different material foundations. And so I think that like saying that liberal norms are just illegitimate as such is wrong, because they are in fact the things that people reflect on normatively in terms of how they think things should be, what they think is fair, what they think they deserve from other people, what they feel they are entitled to, what they feel crime and punishment should be like. If you just say that like these things are useless, then the question is, okay, so what is your alternative if you reject these norms as such? And that alternative really scares people, because the answer seems to be either we're just going to get rid of all social conflict, like we don't have any need for these norms anymore, which seems implausible to people. Like people want democratic deliberation, debate, elections, and so on. Or alternatively, like they suspect that it will be illiberal, like they suspect that like your hostility to liberal norms is a hostility to liberalism as such. And I don't think that any socialists are actually serious about that second alternative. And I think the first is just not very well thought through.
Yeah, right. I mean, it does seem really, really implausible to me that there would just be no social conflict in even an incredibly advanced socialist society where we had, we're like 100% post markets, supercomputers have given us red plenty, all that stuff. Like it still seems like there's gonna be plenty of stuff to have social conflict about. Realistically,
there will be social movements under socialism. They're just going to be responding to different things. Like people are going to want changes as society changes, and so you have to have some kind of institutional structure to be able to absorb and respond to this in a way that we hope is, as we say, socialist democracy as opposed to bourgeois democracy, but democracy nonetheless. And in order for democracy to be legitimate, it has to have a sense of justice. Like people have to recognize each other. That's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think even some things that are hotly contested right now, I don't actually believe would go away. I mean, I'm sure debate about them would take different forms, but even like, okay, example I always think about is like, drug use, obviously a lot of, it's like, the opioid epidemic is very related to economic conditions, etc. But like also lots of rich people have drug problems. So I don't believe that would just wither away, given the end of poverty. And so I would imagine even something like debates about sort of more paternalistic versus more, hands-off, approaches to that. I'm sure that would be, a debate that would continue to exist, various kinds of like, changing social norms that people care about, like those would continue to exist. I mean, like, I don't know, intergalactic space exploration versus spending resources. I mean, there's no reason any of these things, wouldn't be contested issues under socialism. And this maybe gets us to what I did want to just sort of hone in on about what you just said, because you say, okay, so liberalism, I think, if I'm getting this right, one of your sort of worries about liberalism is that even though liberals say, obviously, nearly all liberals say, you could have unjust laws that should be resisted, etc. There's still certain kinds of norms that are often, underlying laws that we actually have that have some status quo bias, that there's like that they have that there are reasons not to be satisfied with these things, and there's a sort of danger of sort of like, okay, I've given you an a priori argument for the norm, and now we just don't have to think about it anymore. If something like that is your worry about that, I do still like, I don't think it's super productive to, worry too much about like which of these things we're calling liberalism and not, but like some of the things that are associated with liberalism, like the idea that it's important to have pluralism and to have respect for, to have sort of protections for, for people being able to, to have unpopular opinions and to, and to have, and to be able to express them and, and all of that stuff. I mean, I think all of that stuff is still very important to like how you conceive of the of this sort of this, of the sort of better norms maybe that would that we should ultimately be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I think minority rights to dissent, rights against the tyranny of the majority, like these are things that on the one hand, in a democratic society, you need to learn to lose. Yeah, like you don't get, if the majority decides against you, you need to learn to lose. But there are good reasons to have strong, like what in the US we call like First Amendment protections, because the minority still needs to be able to win, try to win the next election. They need to be able to assemble, to express themselves, to have the rights to free speech, and they can't be, bullied into the opposite because, and so all of these things are like, this is actually what creates, I think, like what we think of when we think about a healthy democracy and protections like that. Like people need to know that socialists are for those things, and historically we have been. It's only recently that we're now ambivalent about things like free speech. But this is but this is something that I think previous generations were aware of, and I actually think people are pretty clear about this in a lot of ways in their practical activity. But because they were skeptical about creating these theories, the blueprints or the cook shop or having the cook shops, I don't think that these commitments actually became explicit, because socialist behavior has historically been to the contrary. Like, why would you fight for civil liberties, non-discrimination, against segregation, against for freedom of expression, against blacklists, against like all of these things? Why would you do that if you didn't find them intrinsically valuable? They're both intrinsic, and my answer is I think you could say that they're just instrumentally valuable towards socialist ends, but I don't think that's true. I think they're a way of staking out a socialist position that this is what you can expect from us in the future. These are our values. We so I think they're both instrumental and intrinsic. Like these are commitments that socialists have historically had. And so I guess that I'm going to repeat myself. I think that socialist political behavior belies or like undermines the presumed lack of commitment to like some of these norms or these like ideas about justice. I think people are committed to them or have been, and should make explicit why and what we want out of them.
Yeah. So that's the value question, but then there's also the design question, where one of the better, objections to socialism that you mentioned in the article is the idea that in order to realize those commitments in practice, you need to have multiple sort of sources of like independent sources of power. You need to have you can't roughly like the sort of objection that I think people have in mind crassly is like, okay, well, you can't if everything's if everything in the economy is nationalized, then and everything is sort of directed under a single plan, there's sort of no way to have there's no way to realize the kind of ideals that you're talking about, because there's sort of no way for there's sort of no way for the dissidents to gain a foothold because there's just sort of one central power structure.
Yeah.
That's like a different kind of worry, but one that gets to the same place, and it's one that you do address in the article.
Yeah, and my response to that is that most of those objections just assume that socialism is central planning. And I think, and I don't want to, preemptive limit central planning the set of options. Like, I think everyone is right. Most people are rightly suspicious of it because of the experience of the Eastern Bloc and its subsequent collapse and its lack of political democracy and openness. At the same time, I think there are lessons to be learned, and I think people should be less shut off from that. There are things that they did well, and it's possible to think about the things they did well, and then the other critiques can remain. Having said that,
and just as a footnote, I mean, even the successes of social democracy are to a certain extent a successes of expanding the sphere of what's planned by the state.
Yeah, my own view about looking at these alternatives is I think that there are examples in a couple different veins that represent real attempts at a transition, and they all have contradictions and they all have shortcomings, but they also have a lot of success. So I just mentioned that I don't think it's helpful in 2023 to be polemical about the Soviet Union because we all know that's not what we want. But what was valuable? It was a genuine attempt to create a socialist state. And I know that there's a Trotskyist tradition that's just going to really be upset with me for saying that. But I think that the kind of knee-jerk anti-Stalinism that exists usually in this tradition tends to kind of cut itself off at the joints in being able to understand what that was. So even if I don't, and nor should anyone think it's an ideal, there are experiments that they did and things that were successful. And I think that the reason you should be interested in it is simply that it should spark your imagination, and I think it's 2023, dropping that we could get some ideas about what to do in the future.
Copy what works, disregard what doesn't. I'm totally
what doesn't work. Yeah, likewise, and I think if you start seeing it as a genuine attempt at a post-capitalist economy, and not like state capitalism, then that opens up for you more. That just becomes a more interesting question. Likewise, likewise with go ahead.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that the point about social democracy is just that even people who are very resistant to thinking that, I mean, look, I'm with you. I don't think it's helpful to see the Soviet Union or any of these societies as whatever, Narnia, before Aslan, always winter and never Christmas, that I think that they're complicated societies that, that had, sure, some really important negative features, but not only negative features, right? There were positive things about those experiences, and and I think I think we should have exactly the attitude that you just said towards that. But I think the point about social democracy is just look, even if somebody is very closed off about thinking that there's anything that's to be learned in a positive direction from those experiences, it's still look, everybody more or less will admit that Sweden in the 70s wasn't Narnia, right? So and that is to a certain extent a success story about central planning, not of the whole economy or anything like it, of course, but certainly way more than we have here.
I mean, I think that Sweden is distinctly a really interesting case, and I think I would think about it along the same lines that I would think about the Eastern Bloc, which is that it was a genuine attempt at a socialist transition. It wasn't. People usually just collapse it under social democracy and reformism, but I've been saying this on my own podcast a few times, and I'd actually like the opportunity to clarify, which is I think that the reason social democracy should be interesting to socialists is because I don't think they were just after social democracy. I think that there are social democratic traditions, Sweden is one of them, where what they wanted was not reformism. They didn't want a reformed capitalism. They wanted socialism. And there's obvious, and so the immediate rebuttal from someone who is hostile to social democracy is, but why didn't they? Why didn't they? They betrayed you. There's, and they betrayed the working class. They accommodated and they compromised, and fine. But I look at Sweden today and I look at Russia today, and I think I don't see why there's a great reason to think good guys, bad guys. There were genuine experiments and trying to make a transition, and we should learn from them. So I do think that social democracy is not sufficient. I don't think of myself as a social democrat, but I don't see what is to be gained at this point in refusing to understand what they tried to accomplish, because again, there is something to learn, and you can't learn it if all you see is betrayal and compromise. And like when you start like reading the political theory of these people, the utopianism of it, the high-mindedness of it, the optimism about the conditions, it's incredible. It's something that's even hard to relate to. So I agree. I think that
there's also a sort of weird double standard sometimes about if you say, because in some ways that question, okay, so why didn't they, is a little bit like the question of like, okay, so why didn't the Bolsheviks create the kind of socialist democracy that we would want? And
like, wasn't Stalinism always a seed in the growing of Bolshevik democracy? Yeah.
Right, totally. So it's like you could say, like, if you have attempts to create something better and they end in unsatisfying ways, then, I mean, look, we don't want to just exclude human free will for the equation. And, there's lots to learn about what to do differently in the future, but it also seems like if in one case you're willing to say, well, you shouldn't just blame the people, you should talk about the conditions that led to that, then you should be able to say that in the other case,
Saying about your less preferred option,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's right. And I think that what's interesting in both cases is, I think for socialists, the normative resources we can draw. So like these are different intellectual traditions, and there are different ways of thinking about what legitimates a socialist state, some good, some bad. And like that should all be for the taking. Like I think that the problem is that right now that we have a left, such as it is, I'm just going to call it the socialist left, because I don't know how leftism and progressivism became the same thing. Whatever. I'm talking about people who want socialism. Yeah. There's because we are detached from our own history, and we tend to like go. We're just now, looking back at we mostly look back at the 60s to be clear, but like we're kind of like looking at the past and trying to find what works. But this knowledge isn't organic to us because we are disconnected from previous generations of people who did it. Like that chain reaction of knowledge and inherited knowledge is gone. And so given, if that's true, then we have to try to fight for it, I think, intellectually and politically. Like we have to kind of be clear that it's not obvious. We can't browbeat other people into it, and we have to look at our own tradition, I think, with a more ecumenical eye, because otherwise I'm not sure what to do with myself. Like we're not living in Russia in 1905 or 1917, nor are we living in Sweden in 71, and nor are we living in any of the 68 or countries. Like that's not where we're at. So if we're constantly saying that this is what didn't work, and we just feel so sure about that, then it's very difficult to see what would work. And I think that's why it's hard for us to see to actually believe ourselves that like socialism is good and desirable and just. And I think part of it isn't just convincing other people. It's actually having the beginning of some kind of consensus about what it is that we want.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So So we got off into this whole thing about central planning, but I think I think one thing you say in the article is that even in a pretty advanced socialist society, like I said, want to foreclose the possibility of, even if like in a sort of short-term realizable kind of socialism, there still needs to be some role maybe for market mechanisms. You don't want to foreclose the possibilities for what planning could do in the future. But one thing you say in the article is we could have multiple overlapping plans. You don't have to have a single power structure. You can have checks and balances. So, I do want to be aware of your time, but I just like in the maybe our last kind of few minutes here, could say a little bit more about how you would see, one potential desirable way that socialism could work, and also, maybe get into just a little bit one of the most interesting things I thought you said in the article, which is that socialism could very well work in different ways and in different places with different that are at different stages of historical development that have different national needs, and I thought that was really interesting too. So if you wanted to kind of fold that into your answer.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously the vaguest part of what I have to say because, I'm not an economist. And I did some reading. I had a reading group last year during the pandemic, maybe it was a year and a half ago now, where we went through the socialist calculation debate, which, really like opened my eyes to a history of people doing what I'm saying should be done, and less having to do with justice, but more to do with like, what does an alternative really look like? And what I discovered was that people were aware of all these problems. Like before the kind of sedimentation or of a state-driven planning in the Soviet Union, there were real debates about this, about how to calculate things, how to calculate economic value in a way that wasn't just through competitive pricing, how to measure different values that we have, how to preserve pluralism, like so that we're not all crushed by like the general utility of our contribution, and like one of the essays that really stood out to me was Karl Polanyi's essay on market socialism.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this idea about basically consumer councils and producer councils. So basically like a way of determining prices in different industries could be not only happen through like one central mechanism in which people aggregate their best guess at like what demand is and then give that information to suppliers. You could have like consumers involved in the decision, like they are saying what they think are priorities, and then other people are saying, okay, but here's what's really feasible for us given our resources. And then like and then surely algorithms would be involved to kind of find like the right equilibrium among these demands. But the point is really to like have checks and balances on whether or not there's just one single interest driving the economy. And like under capitalism, there is a single interest that dominates all other interests, and that is the interest of capital, the interest of profit. And so other people can fight back and kind of attenuate the system to meet their needs in a better way. Like that's what we call a class compromise. But for the most part, people have to accede to the interests of capital in order to maintain their own standing. So like a trade union can't demand more than their employer can give them to remain and also remain profitable, or else the firm will go under and then they're unemployed. So they have to prioritize capitalist profit even when they fight capital. Okay, so like that is what I think is systematic of a form of systematic domination. And I think that like significantly changing the kind of values that actually create some inputs and having some checks and balances on that would be a really interesting place to start thinking about what a more democratic kind of socialism could be. I think that's my best shot at it because I don't really have like a model. I suggest the Polanyi essay. There's a few others. And then what was your second question?
Yeah, about different forms that could take in different countries.
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, this just seems intuitive. Like, in the first place, I think that one important thing that will have to happen in the first world is that you've got to accept like the developmental needs of people in other countries in the global south. And so that's going to require, accepting high tariffs on imports and so on. It will probably require, like in countries that are deindustrialized, like some reshoring, to be able to bring employment. But so that's like one thing. And in like newly developing countries, it's going to require like diversifying the home market so that you're not just dependent on exporting one type of manufacture or raw material to countries that are going to make stuff with it. So these are all different developmental needs. And so therefore the political systems are just going to have to change. Like they're not going to, it can't be a one size fits all process. Like what I just described in the US of, okay, you need to accept higher tariffs on imports from like developing countries, but also, the top 5% of like 5 jobs that make more money than all of the other jobs combined. You have like this extreme polarization between high wage work and low wage work. Well, you're going to have to create more work in the middle. And that's different than the kind of needs another economy with a huge informal labor market have. So, in a way, the diversity of forms is obvious if you take seriously that there are just different problems that people are facing. And so I would take for granted that the political structure would be different. And I think in the article, I argue, like I pointed out that like in Germany, there are works councils and there are unions, and these are different ways of both regulating wages and a kind of pattern form of collective bargaining, but then there are also ways of people having more immediate forms of control within workplaces, councils like democratic responsiveness to workers. These don't all exist in the same workplace, and it's uneven because I can't really explain why, but you could like imagine that these structures become the basis for a kind of democratic turnover. And the basis already exists for wage planning and negotiation. So you can imagine these becoming transitory models for a more democratic form of socialism. Now, we don't have that in the US, so we'd have to do something different. And the country is so geographically diverse that one of the things I was thinking is that you could have different councils that are responsible for different parts of, like you could organize it more regionally because the output of each region is so different. It's a continent-sized country. So like these are all really speculative, but I hope someone people who are more qualified than me to like nail down some details could like start to gesture at like what they could be, and then maybe political philosophers like me could be like, this is a good idea or a bad idea, like this is justifiable, or it would have these moral pitfalls, or like this has to be like a multi-person, like this has to be a combined effort, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to both think really hard about the underlying values that sort of lead to design choices, where the political philosophy comes in. Also think about the design. And I really like the point about Germany too, because I think there is a sort of good bit of historical realism there too, because we've been talking about all the reasons why it is important to try to figure this stuff out. It is important to give people, you want to write some recipes for the future, if only so people are more confident, that they'll have something to eat in the future, that there is a possible future here, and it's not just, we either recreate the Soviet Union again, or collapse back into this, or this is the only thing that could possibly exist, and so we've been talking about all the reasons to think about how what the future would look like, what we'd like the future to look like, but it does also seem really valuable to acknowledge that real history is always messy and weird, and you're always going to have these I don't know. Not that this is a good thing in this example; it's a bad thing. They should abolish it. But the UK is one of the most advanced capitalist countries in the world, and they still have this weird vestigial monarchy, like it shows that that like you're always going to have some bizarre combination of different forms that come up at different kinds of history. It's never, there's no year zero, right? You're not just starting.
They have a king, I think.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there we go.
I'm against this, by the way, for the listeners.
Sure. They should not have
the most American things about me are, I say this to my students sometimes too, like the most American things about me are the following. I only watch American sports. I mostly listen to American music, and I really I just like republicanism is like how I really feel about things. You know what I mean?
Totally, right there with you. They should get rid of the royal families, but like the fact that they haven't yet, I mean, I think is a sort of vivid example. And they've had this they've had the capitalist mode of production longer than anybody has. That they like that tells you something about how weird and messy the process is in practice. So, which is important to say. Okay, what are the things that you could that already exist in some society under capitalism that you could build on and use to help transition to socialism? What are the things that you'd need to, that you would need to sort of, make up from scratch, and that is, it's maybe a slightly different task than the sort of main one we've been talking about, but it is also an important one.
Yeah. Yeah. You mean like state structures?
Yeah, partially, right. But I mean, like your example was about workplace councils in Germany, right? As something that, like, it's obviously not what we want. They still have capitalism in Germany, but it is something that could be built on for a transition to socialism. In that example, and probably would be because yeah, I mean, you're not going to start from scratch, and maybe even thinking about that example might suggest, that's like a reform we should talk about implementing. We should like talk about more, and in countries where things like that doesn't exist. And again, it's like a slightly different discussion from like, okay, a priori, what would the best way for a socialist future, be to look, but it's maybe alongside that an important one.
Yeah, I mean, in the U.S., there's a whole lot of institutional obstacles to thinking about socialism. And I think one of the first and most important ones is the federal system. I mean, when you think about it, the only reason the state boundaries are the way they are is because of a messy historical set of processes. They're not like, these don't, we have this way of talking about people in every state like they have a nature. But like, this isn't, these are our political boundaries that like the borders of most nation states are to some extent arbitrary and products of historical accident. And I think that like the federal system in the US is like a real inhibition on democracy. And I think that like some way of both contesting that, but changing it to like, if you want to keep a federal system, to put it on a different basis. Like it could be, like I was saying, like what if instead of the state of Arizona, you had like a geographical unit, a political unit in the Southwest that dealt, that was able to say what its political and economic problems are, and was less vulnerable to being captured by like minoritarian rule. Like, so you could imagine thinking about existing state institutions in a way that is like kind of accepting what's legitimate in a certain, like, just saying like, this is what people are used to, this is how people think about political units. But what if we shifted this around to prevent some of this political stalemate, to make it more democratic, to put economic units together so that they make more sense, and that's like kind of far-fetched, but I do think that in the long run, most people know that the federal system is extremely authoritarian and anti-democratic, and reifies the two-party system and allows for minority rule, particularly in the South and in rural areas. So if you want to fix that, the question is, do you just give more votes to people on the coasts, which is tends to be what people advocate, like proportional representation on the coast? That's one solution. But you might also say that there are different ways of thinking about what federal states could look like. I mean, I don't know. I don't have strong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just, all right. Yeah. Abolish Arizona. That's what I got out of all that.
That it was my least favorite state to drive through down there, if we're keeping it real. So.
All right, fair enough. This is really good. We could obviously keep going for hours, but it is dinner time in your part of the world. So let's leave it there for today. So that article again is you can find that in Jacobin, where you can also find some of Lillian's other pieces. It's called "Why Socialists Need to Talk About Justice." So check out Lillian in Jacobin. Listen to her on What's Left of Philosophy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon.
Okay, everyone. Jump scare back to me. In case you're joining us now, let you know that Ben is currently in transit from our live show in New York back to his home. So he couldn't be here with us live. I hope you enjoyed the interview that he did with Lillian recently. So a couple announcements. Because of Ben's absence, we don't have the post game for patrons tonight like normal. We'll definitely find another way to make it up to you patrons who are the best people in the world. As far as other announcements, next week we have Slavoj Žižek on the program. So that's definitely one to look forward to. Thought we'd end this episode with a bang. So next week Ben will be back and we'll have a normal episode with Mr. Žižek. So thank you all very much, and left is best.